Welcome to the Are We Happy Yet podcast. Today's episode is just so good. I know that you'll love it. Today's episode is an interview that we did with Sonya Jensen, who's an amazing couples and sex therapist out of Austin, Texas. Sonya is actually my supervisor as I undergo my sex therapy certification. I have been trained in various couples therapy modalities and am super experienced in couples therapy. And throughout my journey and background is getting more skilled and experienced with providing couples therapy, I have found that even though I've done multiple different types of couples trainings, I've done multiple different types of modalities, I've kind of explored a lot of different pieces in the couples therapy space, I thought it was so weird that sexuality has not been a part of the couples therapy training that I did. And after working with Sonya, I realized that that's kind of the norm. So I decided that I wanted to further my training in sex therapy, which is why I'm undergoing my sex therapy certification and working with Sonya. And just from the get, I was so obsessed with Sonya. I'm such a Sonya Jensen fangirl. I think she has such an amazing approach to couples work and sex therapy. And we talk a lot about it in the episode today, but on this podcast, we're all about exploring things that are taboo or things that we don't really talk about in normal culture. And I think sex and sexuality is one of those things that is just so repressed and not okay to talk about. And it leaves people feeling really ashamed or really isolated or not having sex or whatever. And so I think this conversation is really just a masterclass in sexuality. And it's important for anyone. Sexuality is such a big piece of our humanity. So this conversation goes beyond just married people or people in relationships, single people. This conversation is really just a holistic lens at sexuality and why we need to talk about it more. So I hope you love this episode. If you do, go ahead and like and share it with someone that you love. Maybe share it with someone you're having sex with, and rate and review us, and we'll see you next week.
Welcome to Are We Happy Yet?
I'm Hannah Buzzo, licensed therapist.
I'm Jane Thatcher-Hahn, licensed clinical social worker. We're not just friends, we're therapists who have been working with our clients on improving their mental health and relationships for years. Coupled with our own life experiences, we found ourselves in a conundrum. As mental health becomes less stigmatized and conversations about healing, self-help, and personal growth have gone mainstream, why are more and more Americans reporting lower life satisfaction and increased mental health issues with each passing year?
The question kept nagging at us. Despite the growing openness around mental health, why are we seeing an increase in anxiety, depression, and isolation?
It's baffling, right? We're all diving into therapy, self-help, psychedelics, meditation, life hacks, you name it. But the sense of connection and well-being seems to be slipping away, no matter what we do.
So Jane and I got curious about the bigger picture, how creativity, politics, technology, work, spirituality, culture, and more impact our well-being. Our goal is to spark open, relatable conversations about these topics. Through unfiltered discussions, a few uncomfortable truths, we'll have lots of laughter and lightheartedness along the way. Join us each week as we dig deep into these questions, share insights, and try to understand what will truly, finally, make us happy.
Let's go.
I am so excited for today's episode. This was one of the ones that I couldn't wait to jump on the call today because I know it's going to be a really fun conversation. So I connected with Sonya as I started my sex therapy certification program. She's my clinical supervisor for that program, and I've just loved working with her so far. She's so knowledgeable and cool and has such a different and unique therapy style, which is great for me to learn from. So Sonya is here to talk to us all about sex therapy, sex, relationships. It's going to be a really fun episode. So Sonya, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you guys for having me. I'm so excited to talk about sex. It's my favorite topic, that and talking about couples work. So it's really exciting to join the chat with you too.
Great. So Sonya, if you want to tell our audience just about you and the work that you do, That'd be wonderful.
Absolutely. So I am a high conflict couples therapist, and that's what I specialize in. I'm certified as a Gottman Method couples therapist and an ASEX certified sex therapist. I also have a certification in complex trauma work, and I like to blend all of those methodologies together, including attachment theory, which is emotionally focused therapy. But I've been in private practice for about 8 years now, and I've published 3 books, and I've done my own podcast, like we were talking about before we joined on the call. So I am excited now to just be a guest on other people's podcasts. And I love to do trainings and teach at local universities.
Awesome. Man, you do it all, don't you?
I mean, there was a time where I thought it was cool to do it all. Now I'm trying to pare it down a little bit. As you all know, in the therapy field, you can be as busy as you want to be.
Yes.
So true.
Yes.
Just for our listeners who don't know what high conflict is, and even for me, I have an idea of what I feel like I say that in my therapy practice. This is a high conflict couple, but what would you define as high conflict?
It's a great question. So usually I'm the third or fourth counselor that a couple will see. And by high conflict, what I really look for is couples who lack the emotional regulation skills, or there's a lot of trauma that has been involved either in their relationships or from their own past that make it challenging for them to really be aware of and share their needs in a positive way. There is what we call gridlock conflict. So these couples have conflicts that they come back to over and over again if they're not avoiding them. And when they do come back to them, they find very little resolution in those conflicts, and they tend to just argue and argue in circles with never really getting anywhere.
That's very helpful.
Yeah. So where, Sonya, do you see the high conflict couples? Like, how did you get interested in working with that dynamic and that population? Because it's not an easy one.
No, and that's like a funny, like everybody asked me that question. And the only thing I can relate it back to, I met my husband when I was 16 years old, and we got engaged when I was 17, married when I was 18, and we had our first child when I was 19. And he was active duty military at the time, which, you know, for most of us in the therapy field, we know people in the military community will have higher divorce rates, substance abuse rates, domestic violence rates. And so that was what I was exposed to in the early parts of my marriage and the beginning of my adult life. And so, you know, my husband and I both never really had the kind of an idea of how to have a healthy relationship. It was just like, he'll save me and make my life better, and that'll be great. And then he didn't. And I was like, hey, wait a second, what's this supposed to be like? I kind of went in search of wanting to know how to have a healthy, happy relationship myself. And when I went into grad school, I knew I wanted to work with couples. And I was probably the only therapist in my graduate school that wanted to work with couples. And I was heavily informed by EFT therapy, emotionally focused therapy, by my professors. But when I graduated, I moved from California, where I was, to Illinois. And in Illinois, where I was, in Decatur, Illinois, there was no supervisors near me. So I had to travel about an hour and a half every week to go visit a supervisor. And the only one there was a certified Gottman therapist. And I remember him really being able to break down working with couples in a way that I could assess and understand and give me some real, like, meaty clarity. And I just felt that was so much easier than what I think EFT is, which takes a lot of skill as the clinician to be able to understand the dynamics. And so I like to pair those together, but I definitely was strongly influenced in those early parts of my career to work with high conflict couples using the Gottman method, and then wanting to just know how to do it myself for my own marriage.
Yeah, totally. And that's something we've talked about, I think, in our supervision, and not to get too heady, but how couples, and really all of us, we're not taught relationship skills or emotional regulation skills. So we get into these relationships and it's a shit show and we're in conflict, and we're never taught, like, oh, this is how you approach conflict in a healthy way. These are the 4 horsemen. How can you share a concern, not a criticism? I think it's such an important thing that couples de-shame, destigmatize, that, like, these aren't things we're taught until we do usually enter a couples therapist office, right?
Yes. And most people, the research says, wait 7 years after the onset of issues before even meeting with a couples counselor. And then I've seen so many counselors spend too much time focusing on, like, what were the events of the past week? And that's the feedback I get from a lot of couples since I'm their third or fourth, right? It's like they don't ever learn how to talk to each other. And I think that's what I like about the Gottman method. I can go and do a training out in the community right now and benefit my community because I'm just teaching you basic skills. And then when you're in here in my office, It's like, I'm going to teach you how to talk to each other. Well, I want to have a relationship with you, and me being a part of it's really important. I need you to know what to do when I'm not there. And I think couples counselors need way more training on how to be comfortable with the emotions coming up in the room and the couples getting flooded, and then learning how to self-regulate and come back down and get to the heart of the issue. But many therapists are not trained. And if therapists aren't trained very well in working with couples, imagine how couples who have we've never had role models for this stuff.
Right.
So if we had the skills, we could use them, right?
Totally.
One of the things I've noticed with the clinicians that come through in my practice that I supervise is I've only had one or two who've had that, like, significant amount of training, specifically in couples like you have. And they really love couples work. But I do remember going through school, and I know that most beginning clinicians are pretty overwhelmed by couples. And insider tip, right? Most of us are like, it's much easier to manage one client in a session.
For sure.
But that training piece really helps people enjoy that work and engage and help people move forward. It's just very, from the outside, it's very complex, right? That work is very complex.
Yeah. I'm really getting into depth psychology right now too, in my exploration of working with couples, and how, I think all of our methodology in couples work really emphasizes, like, how do you find the patterns of what's going on in a couple's dynamic? And then what do you teach them to do about that dynamic, and have a new one, which is great. But I think as I've been in this field for as long and worked with as many couples over the years as I have, like, there's an element of, like, I can teach you how to communicate, but so many of us are afraid of being curious about ourselves enough to get to the depth of what we're really truly fighting for. What are the things that made us who we are, and how does that play a role in this relationship with my partner? What's my role to play, and why the relationship is the way it is, or where it's going or not going? And so I'm really enjoying the blend of now depth psychology and getting into deep inquiry, existential crisis. So all of that stuff is kind of new and fresh in my work that I'm enjoying as well.
That's feeling very timely.
Yes.
Yeah, right. I don't know if it's just my perimenopause or it's the state of the world or something, but so many people are wanting to answer the deeper questions, like, what am I here for? What am I doing? And why am I doing it?
100%. To go back to the training piece, Sonya, so you're exactly right. That's my experience too. Couples therapy, I mean, is a very specific niche, and most therapists don't have training in it. So me and my experience, and actually what led me to you, is I'm trained in 3 different couples modalities, and I never got even one PowerPoint slide about how to work with couples and sex. And as I've been working with couples, sex is one of the first things that they want to work on in their relationship. So can you talk a little bit about how that piece lands, the lack of training? Couples therapists are out here doing couples work without any training in sex therapy, and how that shows up for you in your practice?
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's such a great question. I feel like if you're going to work with couples at all, you need to have specialized training in sex therapy. But if you're lucky, you may get one class of it in grad school. I know for Hannah and I, we've done our training through the Sexual Health Alliance, which has led to the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, which is our accreditation body as a certified sex therapist. But it's highly unregulated, and most people don't know this. Like, you can just write in there, I'm a sex therapist, right? But sex is so nuanced. It's a form of communication. And usually when couples are coming into therapy, if they're having communication struggles just on the everyday things, they're absolutely struggling with intimate communication. And I feel like if you're not trained in sex therapy, or know to ask about it, or are comfortable with asking about it, you're going to miss a whole level of depth to this couple's relationship that they aren't ever going to be able to get to, because of, like, they can't get through the muck of the other stuff. So let alone intimate conversation goes out the window. And intimate conversation just means touch. It means knowing how your partner wants to feel and be loved in and out of the bedroom.
What have we been doing for all these years? Is it because it's hard to bring sex as a conversation piece into the university setting, or therapists have their own discomfort with it, or we haven't? I mean, do you have either of you have any theories about why we've sort of got a lack of knowledge around working with that?
I'll say the taboo of it. I feel like our field is predominantly made up of white women, right? And just think about women culturally. We're taught to, like, stay away from the taboo and mind our P's and Q's. And, I think a lot of clinicians are so afraid of their own sexuality that how can they even talk about sexuality with their clients. And so one, I think, is a lack of training. The university setting, I don't know what, like, the taboo, like the politics in the university setting, like, when I was getting my graduate degree, I was at a private Christian university. I got one class on sex therapy, and we basically had to say, like, penis, vagina, like, get used to saying the words, and then we watched an HBO show. So that was the extent. I think universities are getting better at it now, but I just don't think that the people who are training them are actually certified sex therapists. So they don't have the knowledge to be able to speak to it. Do I think that will change as the next kind of round of therapists come out and, like, start becoming teachers in the field? For sure. Or more of us are becoming certified and getting more advanced in our careers and wanting to bring it to the university setting. So I think there's quite a few different reasons. And I think there's still a lot of politics at play, especially in different states around sex and sex education.
That. And I mean, what you're saying is really illuminating for me, like from the beginning, right? Sex education, depending on where you are, depending if you're a girl or a boy or whatever, like it starts off pretty shame based for most of us, right?
I will say, like, I'm going to tell a really funny story, but I grew up super religious. And so we never talked about sex. I mean, I did sex ed at school about my period or whatever, but I remember I had just met my partner, and I had a best friend at the time, and she and I were watching Sex in the City. And at the time, like, it was still coming out, but it was a show already in production. So it wasn't right at the very beginning, but I saw the episode where I think they were telling, Charlotte that she needs to go look at her vulva with a mirror in the bathroom, and they were, like, laughing at her. And I was like, oh my God, you should be looking at your vulva. You should know what that looks like. Right? And I remember thinking, like, oh my God, that's so crazy to even think, like, should I know what that looks like? Right. And so I have found, like, I use that, like, with clients. I'll ask my female clients, like, have you ever looked at yourself? And you should see, like, the horror, I guess, on their faces of, like, no, I've never looked at myself. I don't even know what that area looks like, let alone, like, what it needs, what it likes. Like, I don't know how to express myself. And so I think just rewriting those taboos and, like, learning to get comfortable with our own bodies is huge.
Yeah.
So for people who aren't therapists or aren't even going to therapy or anywhere in that world, what do you wish people knew about sex? I feel like that's a very broad question, so you can start anywhere.
No, it's a great
but
question.
Like,
It's a great question.
What are we missing? Like, tell the lay people, what do we need to know?
I'm going to tell all the people. So one of my favorite things that I picked up in my training through the Sexual Health Alliance was the 5 principles of healthy sexuality. And I think this goes across the board, whether you're a gay or a straight couple, or you're polyamorous or you're monogamous. These things completely apply. And so the first one is consent. What is consent? And I like to talk about it in terms of, like, emphatic consent. From the beginning of the encounter to the end of the encounter, you want to be in it. And some people really are surprised when I say, like, if you stop enjoying yourself or it's no longer feeling good, you can stop. But so many people will freeze or just kind of finish for their partner and kind of lay there. And so you really want to think about you being engaged in the process and what is consent, right? Am I consenting because I feel this sense of obligation, or I feel like my partner is going to be mad at me, or I'm going to be punished in some way? And so you always want to be thinking, like, am I really committing to this because I want to? And I think women especially need to understand this, because there's a difference between what we call reactionary and spontaneous desire. Most of the time, women in sex are reactionary, especially in long-term relationships. So they might consent, early to try getting into the mood, but they may not be consenting because they don't know, like, all the way through if they're going to get there, right? Our research says it takes about 15 minutes of manual stimulation or foreplay for a woman's brain and body to connect, being like, oh, I do like this. And most women will just be like, okay, well, I'm not really into it, so just go ahead and get it done. And is that really consent, or is everybody really enjoying it? So spontaneous desire is lovely when you just all of a sudden feel sexual, and that's what it looks like portrayed in the movies and everything like that. But most of us are reactionary desire types. So consent needs to be from the beginning to the end. And we need to know that at the beginning, we might be consenting to see if we can get into it, not just completing the whole thing. The second one is it's free of coercion, right? And I have often felt that coercion is a lot in the heads of my clients. I have to do this because my partner needs it. I have to do this because it's some sort of obligation, right? Or my partner says, it's been 3 weeks or it's been 2 days, whatever it might be. But healthy sex is not like it's free from coercion. And that's internally as well. I need to want to be in this and feel ready to do this, or at least try to do this versus feeling obligated, like there is some kind of punishment coming out of it. And then the third one is shared values. Do we want the same thing out of this sexual experience? Do both of us want a quick fuck? Are we looking to make love and connect? Are we looking just to play and experiment? But you want to make sure that one person wants the same as the other person. Say, for example, you go and have a sex with somebody that you meet on a date and they're like, I just want a quick hookup. And you're thinking, I'm only going to have sex if I see like this going somewhere, but we're not communicating that we both want the same thing. And then the fourth one is reduce risk of STI and pregnancy, right? And it's very common that I'm talking to people a lot about birth control, even as, you would think as they enter into mid adulthood that they would know about birth control options. But I'm telling them about the risk of STI, right? Especially if they're in open relationships or they're dating, how often are you getting tested? What kind of protective methods do you have? And especially for women, and I think men should be a part of this conversation too. What's the birth control method that we're using? Right? That's going to make you feel comfortable. And then the fifth one is mutual pleasure. From start to finish, are both of us enjoying ourselves? And if your answer to that is no, there could be a lot of different reasons, like painful sex, not being stimulated enough, the type of positioning and things like that. So you need to have active communication around what is pleasure and how you feel it, and not just in the bedroom, but outside as well.
So my question for you, Sonya, is these things that you just named, all of them require open communication, right? And like an open dialogue, but yet, I mean, in my own experiences as a person and a professional in this field, like in what you said, there's so much taboo around it. So how do you think that taboo and like all of our social programming around not talking about this topic interferes with these 5 layers of healthy sex?
Oh my gosh, it interferes with them completely. That's why most people aren't having healthy sex, especially the populations that are repressed around talking about it. And that's why sex education, I think, is so important. And sometimes when I'm giving sex education to adults in their 40s and 50s, this is the first time they've had any kind of sex education. I had a client one time who had been married for 45 years and had just had her first orgasm with her partner.
Wow. She was married for 45 years and had just had her first orgasm
with her partner. And most of the time I'll talk to women who say, well, I'm not really into sex, or I don't really like sex. One, they're usually repressed because nobody's really taught them to explore anything about their sexuality. But how can you communicate something, Hannah, to your point, that you don't know?
Yeah.
So I think healthy sex education, I think there's more available now than ever. Even if you're, in a state that represses sex education in school, I think you can go online and there's a lot of great educators out there. But going back to what I said at the very beginning of this podcast, is sex is a conversation. And so it's a form of communication. And so learning basic communication skills internally with a partner, with a friend, you have to know about yourself, how to communicate yourself, and then destigmatize the shame that comes along with sexuality in order to get to the place of like the 5 pillars of healthy sexuality.
Right.
There's a lot of really great websites too, especially for women and couples. There's 2 in particular that I love to send people to. The first one is omgyes.com. Is a great website for people learning about female sexuality. And then beeducated.com is a great resource for individuals and couples who want to explore different avenues of sexuality or sexual play and have a way to look for and talk about it, so that they can incorporate some of it. Like, I would really like to try this position or this technique, and then their partner picks one, and then they can explore and practice together, but it helps them communicate.
So it sounds like what you both are seeing, you're seeing that obviously communication between the couple or the group is a big barrier, but it also sounds like there's this big self-exploration piece or comfort with your own self and sexuality. And I think you might say, I'm a straight cis woman, so I'm comfortable with my sexuality because I haven't had the same struggle as a bisexual woman or, those types of things. But what you're saying is that's not what brings comfort with your own personal sexuality, right?
Right. You kind of, in order to communicate what you want, you have to know your body. And so many of us are afraid of or have been shamed for having a sexual relationship with ourselves. And so we don't really learn and we expect our partner to teach us. To be honest, 'cause most of the time our partner doesn't know either, unless you're with a more experienced partner.
What did you guys hear about masturbation when you were young? I heard you would grow hair on the back of your hands or that girls would grow hair on their face. Like, did you guys hear any myths that kept people from masturbating when you were young? Is
I
that
just
my,
heard I was going to go to hell. So
yeah.
other than that, what about you, Hannah?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think I like was talked to about it, to be honest, like at all. I don't think I was told anything. Like, I think it was just complete shame. We're going to avoid this.
Yeah. That's so funny. I've never heard the hair on the backs of your hands, but I love that. That would really scare somebody. Like, you can see that I masturbated. Oh my God. But you think of the word. I didn't even like the word. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
gross. Like, who wants to masturbate? That's gross.
Yeah. How does the shame piece show up between couples? Like, you don't know what you don't know. We're not talking. Like, what are common roadblocks or barriers or conflicts? What do you see in your office?
A lot of people are afraid to tell their partner they're not very good at foreplay or sex. Because they don't want to hurt their feelings. I think many people are afraid that they will be judged by their partner for the things that they want. And I think this is particularly with oral sex. Couples have a really hard time talking about foreplay more than just penetration. And obviously, there's way more to foreplay than just oral sex, but foreplay seems to be the most misunderstood and reduced part of the sexual experience. And that's where couples really struggle, because there will be a partner who wants to have foreplay, but like they can barely get their partner in the mood. And so when they do, the partner's like, well, I just want to get it over with. Right. So then sex does feel very one sided. And there will be some people who are adverse to certain types of foreplay. And so then it feels like they can't, their partner can't bring it up to them. This is what turns me on. So there's just a lot of maybe insecurity or dislikes or a lack of interest and engagement and wanting to pleasure their partner. And that's what creates a lot of distance, because if you say one time like, hey, I want it this way, and my partner's like, I don't want it that way, it usually creates this narrative of them, well, then what I want isn't really important to my partner, or who I am and what I like is shameful because my partner judged it as being bad or unnecessary or gross or whatever that may be. So it's interesting because I don't think a lot of people struggle with the act of penetration. I think they struggle with allowing themselves to play and being completely lost in this feeling of play and pleasure for the sake of play and pleasure. And it becomes very much about just getting it done and a necessary duty.
Yeah, 100%. And I see that too a lot in my own clients. Like, it becomes an obligation or a point of resentment, right? If we're just doing this thing to like get it done. And then clients sometimes, hormones, menopause, medication changes, like orgasms aren't happening. And so then if that's the only goal of your sexual relationship, how much that fucks up your dynamic, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think if people have conflicts about things, and the Gottman method and the Gottman Institute would say that 69%, so let's round it to 70% of what couples argue about is perpetual, meaning it's never going to go away. It's something that has to be managed. And so often sex is one of those main perpetual conflicts where you two are very different. The way that you view sex, the way that you like sex is going to be different than the other person. How often you want it, which can change, like you were saying with hormones and time of life and having kids and all that stuff. But if they have a few fights about it, then it becomes a gridlock. Now we can't even talk about it. Or when we do, it becomes this big blowout and then it's lost all of its connection. And it's more this thing we dread to talk about. And so we don't even touch it with a 10-foot pole until it's been like 3 months. And then my partner's like, I got to have it. And you don't want me to have it anywhere else. So then I've got to beg you for it. That doesn't feel good. And then it's just a mess.
Totally. Yeah.
Other things I've heard about sex. I've heard this story that all like issues in the bedroom reflect something else in your relationship, right? Like if you have an issue with sex, it's actually about something else. Do you think you can have an issue just with sex?
I absolutely think
Not
you can have an issue just with sex.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, sure. I always say we're never fighting about what we're fighting about. We're fighting for something. You know, maybe we're fighting for play and connection. Maybe we're fighting for exploration and intensity and passion. So, yeah, I mean, you could technically say we're fighting about sex, but there are deeper themes to what sex means for us. So, it's important to, as a sex therapist, to incorporate like, what does sex mean to you? Because it's our narratives that shape our thoughts, and then our thoughts that shape our actions towards sex. And so, you know, I think it's a good question of like, what are we truly fighting for versus are we just fighting about the lack of, you know, consistency or, you know, with enjoyment with sex or frequency or whatever. But there's definitely there's deeper meanings to it, but it can just be about the act of sex too.
And I can see where that leads to gridlock, right? So if I mean, even the way you just said it, right? Like, okay, we've tried to have this conversation a couple of times and people feel shamed or rejected or scared. So then we're not talking about it, and then we're not having sex, and then that leads to a deeper disconnection.
Absolutely. And then it's like, what really connects us? What way do we play? You know, the average
Yeah.
couple spends 20 minutes a week talking to each other. And of those 20 minutes, it's usually logistics, right? So we don't really play. We don't really date each other. You know how hard it is for me to get couples just to spend 5 to 10 minutes a day checking in with each other, and then they really don't know how to do it. So sex becomes something like way down the line because now we have all these other things that are you know, packed up around it. But it's so much easier in the early parts of our relationships to be sexual, and we forget to tend and nurture that side of ourselves. It gets lost. And then it just becomes for someone else. And we don't even know how to play together anymore. There's no pleasure. There's just doing, doing, doing.
Why is it 20 minutes a week? Because we're so busy, we don't have
Yeah.
time. Okay.
Yeah. That study was done a long time ago. I saw it in my training with the Gottman Institute. But what it was really saying, couples, dual working couples with kids spend an average of 20 minutes a week together. But I have seen that across the board that I would say that's 20 minutes of like deep, thoughtful conversation. I would say that's even a stretch for most couples.
Wow.
So wild. I just got off co-facilitating a couples retreat this weekend using psychedelics with some of my colleagues, and that was a thing that came up, right? Because they're here in this house in the middle of nowhere. They're really not on their phones. They're like, there's no kids, there's no work. They were just like, we've talked about things for the first time in forever, and we've been married for 8 years, 30 years. I think to myself, like, how wild is that we choose to spend our life with this person and then we spend 20 minutes a week with them, right? Talking
It is
about
wild.
things. Yeah.
It's wild. And most of the time they end up having to pay me hourly once a week because that's where we're going to have like we're not talking about anything else. We're here to talk about your relationship, right? And you know, I always tell my clients I want to work myself out of a job. You guys have to learn how to communicate, but it is extremely challenging because we're always prioritizing other things and taking for granted that the relationship will always be there, which is not surprising that women are the more likely gender to go start the divorce process.
And I'm even thinking of what you were talking about earlier about the expectation that your spouse will teach you how to have a sexual relationship or even maybe teach you how to communicate. I mean, I think we come into these relationships with an expectation that it's going to either be easy or the other person is going to make it easy. I just talk with my clients a lot about this is going to be a lot of work. A relationship, an extended long-term relationship over time where you're changing and your life and finances and body is changing, the world is changing. There's no way that can't be a pretty significant amount of work. But I think we come in with a lot of fantasies around a happily ever after story that includes sex. Like, I'm always going to want to have sex with you, or that's always going to be easy. Right.
Right. I think it was Esther Perel in her book, Mating in Captivity, or one of her podcasts, where she says the average person falls in love 2 to 3 times in their life, and they're lucky if it's with the same person. And I actually think that's really beautiful because we are going to change. Our partner's going to change, and we have to learn to fall in love with the person that they are becoming and that we are becoming. And sometimes that will match and sometimes it won't. But if you want to stay together, you have to learn how to learn each other. Because, right, like if we're only having 20 minutes a week and we've been together for a long time, we're probably making more assumptions than we are being curious. And we kind of pigeonhole our partner into this version of them that we think they are. And so without genuine curiosity and seeing our partner as fluid and evolving, we really shrink down sexuality in general and passion in that way because we already know everything about them and we've reduced them to this person that they were for all these many years.
Sonya, how important is sex in a relationship?
The importance of sex in a relationship is determined by the individuals within the relationship.
Because often I hear this thing, I don't know what your thoughts are, like in sex in particular with couples, like a big focus on, is this normal? Is it
Yeah.
okay that we do this? Is it okay that this, right? It's like a lot of checking against some sort of outside
Right.
expectation. And I didn't mean to ask a trick question, but that's kind of what I was hoping you would say is like, it's important based on how important it is for the two of you, right? But you
Yes.
have
Yeah.
to be able to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, there is I love the Gottman method. So when I talk about research, I talk about them. But this wasn't in particular to sex, but I think it matches here is that like if a couple is on the same playing field, right? If like the way they communicate is the same style, it's totally fine. Like if you guys are not communicators and neither one of you wants to communicate about anything, as long as both people are okay with that, like you have a match. It's when one person wants the frequency of sex different than the other person, or the frequency of talking about feelings than the other person, that you have a mismatch. And the mismatch is what creates the conflict or the tension, right? So, if a couple are both fine with having sex once a week or once a month or once a year, like if both of you are fine with that, you don't have to try to come to some standard culturally. It's between you and your partner. But you do have to learn to communicate and compromise if you have a mismatch. And more often than not, if you're in a counselor's office or should be in a counselor's office, there are areas of your relationship where you are mismatched. And you're trying to bring your partner to your side and they're trying to bring you to their side.
I love this question about what's normal. And I mean, we all have our own personal sex lives. And then as therapists, we're privy to lots of other people's sex lives. So I've got clients who haven't had sex for 5 years with their spouse. And so I think culturally, we would say that's not okay.
Right.
What are your thoughts on, like, can you not have sex for 5 years?
I mean, as long as both of you feel fine with the amount of sex you're having or not having, I think it's fine. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons why people can't have sex.
Yeah.
Or don't want to have sex. And there can be a lot of different reasons that you have the relationship you have. It could be companionship. It could be for financial reasons, right? I think there's a lot of creative solutions. None of us really like, especially in the past, like to talk about like,
Yeah.
I don't think you have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I'm not in any way, shape, or form saying that everybody has to, you should open up your relationship. I think monogamy is wonderful. I practice monogamy, but I work with a lot of couples that don't. But say you have a relationship where everything else is really great, but you are very mismatched on libido. I think it is important for the clinician to bring up the conversation of like, do you have to meet your partner's needs 100%, or is this something that you guys want to talk about with potentially opening up the relationship, and what would that look like? But again, that it has to be very careful.
I think what I'm seeing more with the particular population that I work with is less choice and more just sort of, this is where we ended up
Right
with our sex life, which I'm assuming is probably pretty common. Like, this wasn't necessarily a very purposeful conversation that we had, but now we're at this level of frequency and this level of excitement and play and connection and communication about it. So, I mean, just trailing off of what you all have said about communication and making sure you end up in a spot that you also want to be and that your partner
and we're
wants
not
to be.
owned by our partner, right? Like, would like to laugh that I'm like a super vanilla sex therapist because I practice monogamy. I'm like not really that cool, but I like it and it works for me, right? But I think people are so afraid to talk about, like, I would hate to go to my partner and be like, I am feeling like sexually frustrated and well, we're not compatible or I need something else. It would be hard to have that conversation. I'm sure it'd be hard for my partner if I had that conversation, but repressing is never going to get you anywhere good. And when we repress, we usually end up trying to get our needs met in unproductive ways, or we build up a ton of resentment, which ends up, not helping the relationship. I would rather have hard truths than easy dishonesty.
And I think it's hard. I mean, I think it's hard to get folks on board with that, right? Like we are so interested in like, especially we have busy lives and stuff going on and people are overwhelmed. So like why add another thing to rock the boat? But I see that so much with couples around all kinds of things, but sex included. Like I'd rather not bring this up because it's going to rock the boat. It's going to be some short-term discomfort, but long-term they're dying inside and their relationship is suffering, right?
I mean, the worst thing you can do for yourself and your partner is practice avoidance. And there are some people that are verbal processors, right? Like I may not really want to go open up the relationship, but feeling like my relationship is shut off and closed and I can't talk about it and I'm not really fulfilled by it, that I might want to just talk about how unfulfilled I am and the ideas I have around finding fulfillment. Doesn't mean I'm actually going to want to go out and do
Mm.
something. And I talk a lot about this with couples, that there's a difference between fantasy and desire. Like, I can fantasize about sexually relevant stimuli, right? Something that's really engaging in my own private life. I don't even have to necessarily share it with my partner. And then there's desire, where I actually want to go fulfill that. Like, I have these fantasies that I'm transitioning into desire, and they can be very different. I can have a fantasy life that in no way mimics what I would like to do in my personal life. So letting couples kind of understand that, of like, your partner may have a fantasy and they don't know if it's a desire, but not being able to tell you about the fantasy if they want to, and seeing what your level of participation is in that fantasy with them, that really, I think it decreases the depth of the relationship to have to hide pieces or aspects of ourselves out of shame or discomfort or just avoidance of not wanting to hurt somebody's feelings. And I definitely think if you're not wanting to hurt somebody's feelings and so you diminish your own self, you are not practicing healthy boundaries within yourself. You are not the healthiest version of yourself when you're reducing yourself to make other people comfortable.
And how much of that do you think, I mean, I'm thinking specifically for women, how much of that do you think comes from our cultural programming that like you will grow hair on the back of your
Right.
hands or you'll go to hell or like you're a slut, right? Like how much does that piece impact this?
I think it impacts it in a huge way. I think we've come a long way in feminism and like feeling like empowered, but I still feel like on a day-to-day practice, we're still always afraid of upsetting people and being different. There is so much fear and unknown in being different. I think that's why Brene Brown talks about shame so much, right? Like, there's courage to be found in being yourself because it's a huge risk. You're not following. And we are so afraid of being abandoned or lonely or rejected, that we settle for way less than what we want to.
I love this talk about fantasy versus desire. And I just was thinking about these things that skyrocketed in the zeitgeist, like 50 Shades of Grey, where all of a sudden everybody was like, I didn't know that all these women had these secret fantasies about BDSM. And I just love this, like, all of a sudden we can all say that we love these things that we can fantasize about these things and think about these things that we've been pretending like we're either not interested in or don't care about.
Yeah,
Just kind of right in front of our faces.
absolutely. I call it cliterature. That's my favorite thing.
Gliterature?
Cliterature.
Cliterature, that's even better.
Because I think it's sexually relevant stimuli. It's
Mhm.
something that engages our brains and our body in a way to feel sexual, but it doesn't actually mean we want to do it. And women, I think, in general, are more, I think sex is a brain thing for women. Like, our brains have to be into it as much as our bodies, in terms of like, I'm into it or I'm not, right? And that's why I think foreplay can take so much longer for us, because we have to see if we can get there. Can our brain connect with our bodies that it wants this kind of pleasure? And so we shortcut that when we take away foreplay off the table. And foreplay can be reading literature.
How does this connect to like kink and fantasies and things? I mean, I have clients come into my office and, it literally takes years for them to share like, and, non-judgmentally, I'm like, this is like low hanging fruit. Like, it's just pretty mild. But to them, I mean, it's something
It's
they've
huge.
built so much self-protection around. So can you talk just a little bit about shame and like things you're interested in and kinks and fantasy and how that can show up for folks?
I think there's a lot of shame with kinks, right? And kinks are, again, it's just ways in which we get sexually stimulated. So we sometimes want to talk about it. We sometimes want to role play it out. And we're so afraid of rejection because we don't want to do anything that would make us feel like we're going to be rejected. So that's the piece where like shame comes in and it's like, ooh, that's taboo, or ooh, they're not going to like that, or ooh, you're going to feel silly and stupid. And I think in order to have really great playful sex, we need to kind of take off the table that there is a taboo. As long as I'm with a consenting partner who is willing and open to try these things, like, it's safe to try whatever it is that you want to do. I would never tell you to force something on your partner that they are uncomfortable with. But if both of you are open to exploration and you're both okay with it, I think the sky's the limit. Do whatever you want to do.
This idea of women need a longer amount of time for foreplay. I mean, I just hear a lot of this in my office of like, well, I can't get into it, or I'm not putting the effort in, or like use it or lose it. There's just a lot of stories around that. So how do you feel about somebody engaging in foreplay, engaging in sex when they're not ready with the hope that they will get ready? Is that kind of what you're saying? Like give that some
Yeah.
time and that's
Yeah, give
okay?
it some time. Like, don't skip the
Mhm.
foreplay and just throw on the lube and get in there. Like, let your body see if it can relax into it. And I say, especially for women after they've had children or as we age, we need to bring toys into the mix. Sometimes
Mhm.
manual stimulation or oral stimulation isn't going to be enough to get that going. So, again, consent has to be from the beginning to the end. So, you can consent to trying the foreplay, and it takes, I think, an average of for 80% of women can have an orgasm after 15 minutes of active stimulation. So it takes a good long time for your body to maybe say, I'm ready for this. But I think before a woman is penetrated, she should be fully engaged in the process and want it. And I don't think she should rush herself, and I don't think her partner should rush her.
And that even, right, like makes us feel shame and wrong and bad because that's not like what the movie or porn or
I
anything
know.
portrays, right? It's like, oh, the minute like you get in bed, like, and they go down on you or whatever, you're kissing, you're
Yeah.
like ready to have sex, which is, I mean,
Yeah.
scientifically, 80% of women, you just said 15 minutes, right? So it's like the how counter that is to the reality that we all in the blueprint we all have in our mind of what
Oh
it
my
means
gosh.
that,
We feel
yeah,
like we shouldn't take up that much time,
yeah.
right? Like it's so crazy that I'm not getting into it. I feel rushed. Like, are they even enjoying it? Whatever. And I think this is where you kind of need to have your own private fantasy life too. Like you can like start to like engage your brain, like think of things that you find sexually relevant. Ask your partner to touch you in a way that makes it feel sexually stimulating. Take your time. Do not rush straight to any form of penetration if your body is not ready for that. One of the top reasons women have pain in sexual intercourse is lack of stimulation. They're not ready. And so we need to really be thinking about women taking their time and enjoying their own pleasure. And that is not, foreplay is so much broader than just manual stimulation of the clitoris, right? It's my brain, it's my stress levels, it's what I allow to be sexually relevant as a fantasy versus shaming myself for the fantasy, getting my partner involved in my pleasure as well.
The flip side for men, I think
Mhm.
the cultural story is men always want sex and they can never get enough sex from their partner. And that is true for many men. What are some of the other challenges that you're seeing modern men face around sex?
Well, one, I think they don't want to feel like they're pressuring their partner.
Mm.
They want to know how to engage their partner. They struggle, a lot of men struggle with anxiety around being able to get and maintain an erection, right? And size and, technique and all those things. So I think there's a lot of anxiety for men too that make the sexual experience very challenging. And one of the main ways they're being educated around sex is pornography.
Yeah.
Mm.
And pornography is not educational. It is recreational. To believe that you are, I mean, it depends on the porn you like to watch, obviously, but if you're talking about just like heterosexual porn, it's like the woman's always ready. And she just wants you all the time. And so then their female partner has reactionary desire type and they're like, why don't you desire me and want me? And and then they feel like not enough. And that's a really sad thing that I see is like men really crave being desired and they think that there's something wrong either with them or with their partner for not desiring them or desiring sex, when it's really biological and like needing to understand your body and your phase of life that you're in. I will often, like, I'm using gender stereotypes like female and male, but I think even in the queer community, that in a partnership I will see one partner take on one of those.
Mm.
So I see the dynamic regardless of the type of relationship, usually in terms of how turned on a partner gets, what types of foreplay they like, the anxiety that they bring to the table, the trauma that they've experienced and how that impacts their sex life, and the taboo nature of feeling shame of like, maybe like I've worked with gay couples who maybe want to have started out in a monogamous relationship but want to open it up and go to play parties and things like that, and learning to talk through rules and expectations and things that kind of safeguard or protect the relationship, but allow for sexual exploration and play. So regardless of the relationship, I have definitely seen the same dynamics that I've seen in heterosexual couples and gay couples as well.
Sonya, going back to the research you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that couples wait on average 7 years before entering couples therapy. I think in my practice, a lot of couples come in when they've been arguing and fighting a lot more than in the past, or someone's ready to leave and they want to see if there's a way that they can make it work. What are some signs or things that couples could notice that perhaps it's time for you to enter couples therapy to work on this stuff proactively before it gets to the 7 years too late?
Yeah, for sure. Well, definitely premarital. Before you get married, and don't go to a pastor, like go to a legit therapist. Okay. I don't have anything against pastors, but they don't have clinical training. Um, in the different dynamics that are involved in a long-term marital relationships, and we see a decrease in divorce rates by over 30% when you have good quality premarital education. So just safeguard your relationship that way. I'm a little biased, but I think every couple should be in therapy, even if it's just once a month. I say invest about 12 hours a year in your relationship, just because there's two things that I teach my associates that when you look in couples work and preparing couples for active couples work is their ability to emotionally regulate and is their self-reflection. And so couples therapy can be at any point if you're noticing that there may be a struggle to emotionally regulate, like there's a certain emotion that my partner cannot feel or have me experience, or there's maybe some avoidance, or we're trying to just avoid conflict. Those are some yellow flags that I think should be like, hey, we need to go figure out what our relationship to conflict is, where that came from. And so I think even if you're not in trouble, establishing a relationship with the counselor who can assess you. And that's why I like the Gottman method, just because we can do a pretty thorough assessment, even if you're in a good, healthy relationship. And then we can still educate you on how to stay healthy. But everybody inevitably is going to need some kind of support because life gets rocky. And to already have an established relationship with a counselor and being able to call up and being like, hey, we need to see you, makes it so much easier than waiting till like things are an absolute mess.
What are some signs of a good couples therapist?
That is a great question because oh, my heart breaks. Your opinion of their relationship does not matter. Okay. It is you are there to help them see outside of their relationship. And I think a good couples counselor can assess it and can educate you. Like, this is what I'm seeing and this is what it's causing. And here's the dynamic. I'm going to help you guys figure out the dynamic. If you have a couples therapist that's just like, how was the week? And you guys are just fighting, and they feel not confident to kind of step in and say, hey, we can keep talking about this, but we're going to do it in a different way because the way you're doing it isn't working. So you need a confident therapist. You want to ask them what postgraduate training that they've done. If you're seeing a therapist who has a lot of opinions and talks a lot, it's probably a problem. If you're seeing a therapist who is very like one-sided, or does secret keeping, that's a problem. Mainly the biggest issue I see is there's therapists who have been uncomfortable with exploring different issues and lacking the training, and two, they're not very confident on how to jump in and recreate a new dynamic. And those are things that I would definitely be looking for when shopping for a couples counselor.
I always tell my clients that there's like the minutia, there's the detail, there's the content of what you're talking about, both in individual and couples therapy. And then there's the communicating about how you communicate or looking for those bigger, deeper patterns. And I think good therapy is always going to take you underneath and beyond the minutia, right? To bigger patterns, deeper things.
I mean, if people knew what to do, they'd do it.
Yeah.
They don't need to go to therapy and rehash what they're already doing.
Right.
They need something new. And so I think the therapist has to be really good at assessment and looking for patterns and dynamics and being able to educate to it and then redirect and educate on what we're doing. Regardless of the methodology that you use, you should be able to, through that lens, be able to assess what the couple is doing and what they're not doing, educate them about that, and then create that space for them to practice it in your therapy and outside.
What are you telling? I mean, when a couple comes in and you say that, right, this is a healthy couple or this is a strong bond, what kinds of things are you seeing that tip you off to that?
Yeah, they're a couple who prioritizes spending time together. They're deeply curious and interested about one another. They have really positive narratives about their partner. Like they like assume positive intent, believe that
Mm,
their partner is doing the best they can, or they have grace because they understand what's going on in their partner's life. They are both able to adequately identify and articulate their needs and state them in a positively stated way. When it comes to conflict, they don't avoid it. They actually create rituals in which they address these issues on a regular basis and check in on the maintenance of the issue.
mm.
There's pretty good emotional regulation, and there's the ability to pause and take a break and always come back to repair if emotion dysregulation happens. And they do a lot of active dreaming together. Like they know their partner's dream and are supportive, and then they also have dreams together that they're talking about.
And that's not, you're talking dreams for life, for not just sex, right? You're
Yeah,
talking about just dreams
exactly.
for your world. Yeah.
The good news there is everything you said. I mean, to me, hearing it can be worked on, right? None of
Yes,
that is like
100%.
fundamental to two people that come in. All of that stuff is workable. And so if couples are feeling stuck or, frustrated, just knowing that like a lot of this stuff is skill based and can be worked on, right?
Yes, because most of us weren't taught it, and that's the
Yeah.
thing. It's
Mhm.
like usually if you have the resources, you can use it. But the only thing that would make those tools difficult to use is emotional dysregulation
Yeah.
or an inability to take personal responsibility. And so that's what's you will always have to, as a couples counselor, be working on those things so that couples counseling is effective.
Sonya, this has been such a fun conversation and I think so important because I see in my clients, individual and couples, all this shame and frustration around like relationships not working. And I think a lot of it has to do with the cultural programming around sex and relationships and connection. And so I'm so glad you debunked some of this and kind of normalized a lot of the struggles that people face in these areas.
Can you tell us about the books that you've written and how people might find you and get in touch with you if they're interested in learning more?
Yes. So I have written, they're all on Amazon, or you can go through my website, sonyajensen.com. But the Blended Family Journal for Stepmoms, the Blended
Mm.
Family Workbook for Teens, and the Couple's Guide to Love and Understanding, which is a workbook on communication for couples. Those are all on Amazon, or like I said, going to my website. And you can also get in touch with me through social media across all platforms. It's the Sonya Jensen, or you can email me, sonya@sonyajensen.com.
Great. We'll put all that in the notes too so people can find it easily.
You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for having
Thank
me.
Thank
you.
you. You've been listening to Are We Happy Yet? A Green Roof Studios production. This episode was recorded and produced by Hannah Buzzo and Jane Thatcher Hahn.
If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love for you to rate, review, subscribe, and share it with someone you care about. Your support helps us reach more listeners. And for every rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we're donating to a charity connected to one of our guests. Check the show notes for more details on this month's featured charity.
Thanks for listening. See you next time.